My name is Marcus, and for many years I hid behind a reputation built on violence. I wasn't just another criminal trying to survive the chaos of the streets where I grew up. I became someone who blindly believed that fear was the purest and most efficient form of power. From an early age, I learned that when people are afraid of you, they don't question your orders, they don't cross your boundaries, and most importantly, they don't get close enough to realize how empty you are inside. I've heard all my life that the world belongs to the strong and that compassion is just an excuse to lose. So I made a silent pact with myself. The colder my heart, the further I would go. Over time, that promise turned into armor. I built a version of myself that didn't feel, didn't hesitate, and didn't forgive. In my territory, my name circulated before I even arrived. And when I entered a place, silence filled the air like a warning. I called it respect because it was more comfortable to believe it than to admit the truth. What people felt was terror. I confused fear with admiration, control with strength, and the more this illusion grew, the further I distanced myself from what once still existed of humanity within me. I prided myself on not feeling guilt, not feeling remorse. He believed that emotions were useless burdens carried by weak people. I used to say that on the streets there were only winners or dead men, and that I would never be the dead man. I didn't realize that I was dying inside every day, not from a gunshot or an ambush, but from the very emptiness I was feeding. The real war was never with the police, with other gangs, or with rivals. The real war was against what I refused to see. My soul was fading away. I carried weapons, but the abyss I was trying to avoid was within me. Something whispered that I was going too fast toward a point of no return, but I ignored it, thinking the world owed me something. I didn't realize that it's not the world that collects spiritual debts. It's heaven, and it was precisely when I felt invincible that the fall began, because crime seemed like freedom, until the day it showed me it was just prison in disguise. You still don't know how this abyss began. The story of when crime seduced me is only just beginning. I know this testimony is affecting you deeply, so stay tuned. What will be revealed later may change your beliefs about life, death, and eternity. If you'd like to hear more testimonies like this, subscribe to the channel and leave a like. This helps this message reach those who need to hear it before it's too late. When I discovered that fear had the power to open doors that nothing else could, I felt as if I had found a secret key to a world where I finally existed. Crime didn't begin as a definitive choice. It began as a relief from the constant feeling of being invisible, of being just another number lost in the statistics of misery. When you grow up without reference points and without a future, any crumb of control feels like a victory. The streets offered me what I never had: recognition. Every time I held a gun, I felt I finally had an identity, as if that cold metal was an extension of my will, and as long as the trigger was in my hands, nothing could touch me. Not the police, not the law, not God. The money started flowing in quickly, and along with it came people who approached me not for who I was, but for what I offered. Compliments fed my ego, and the ego is always hungry. When I entered a place, eyes lowered, and that silent submission became my fuel. I used to say it was respect, but today I understand it was just terror. I confused being feared with being important. Cars started appearing, private parties, long nights filled with excess. The feeling of power was like a drug. The more I received, the more I wanted, and the more I accumulated, the emptier I became. I was surrounded by people, but inside me there was a deafening silence that I couldn't silence. The street demands constant attention, and vigilance became my routine. I slept with a gun beside my bed, distrusted every glance, and lived believing that any mistake could destroy me. I said I led the gang, but it was the gang that kept me trapped in the persona I had created. There comes a point when the spirit tries to warn us that we are losing our way. I felt that warning, but I stifled it with noise, arrogance, and violence. He believed he was building freedom, when in reality he was building a prison without bars. The glory that crime offers always comes at a price, and mine began to be exacted the day the first blood touched my hands. From then on, Nothing remained the same. The first time I pulled the trigger, it wasn't for survival, it was for pride. I remember that day as if my soul were trapped in that instant. Even today, when I close my eyes, I can see that boy's face. He was too young to bear any mark of the world, and yet there he was, in the middle of a conflict that didn't even belong to him. There was no real threat, no risk to me, but I needed to prove I was the boss. I needed to ensure that no one would ever dare challenge my authority. When the gun felt heavy in my hand, I felt as if I were holding power itself. And when my finger obeyed even before my consciousness reacted, I felt something worse than fear. I felt pleasure. The gunshot echoed more inside me than in the air. The sound pierced my very core, and for a second I froze. Not from the shock of having taken a life, but because I realized that something within me had been awakened. I expected to feel guilt, remorse, regret, any human sensation that would remind me who I was. But I felt nothing. My mind filled with a false sense of strength, as if that act had elevated me to a superior category. As if I had proven that I was, in fact, someone who should not be contradicted. And at that exact moment, the silence of the soul began. On my way home, I thought that restlessness would overtake me, that I would lose sleep, that boy's eyes would haunt me. But none of that happened. My conscience tried to speak, but I swallowed it as easily as I pulled the trigger. The absence of remorse was the sign that I had crossed an invisible line. That act not only took a life, it took away my capacity to feel. What should have been a trauma became fuel for my ego. I had discovered that it was possible to silence guilt, and when you discover that you can silence your conscience, you lose the last link to the truth. After that day, everything became easier. The trigger ceased to be a limit and became a habit. Violence stopped being a reaction and transformed into a language. The first bullet opened a door, and I walked through it without looking back, ignoring that on the other side there was no glory, only darkness. I didn't know it, but at that moment I signed a spiritual contract with hell itself. A contract that stated that the more blood I spilled, the further I would be from any chance of redemption. I thought I had gained power, but what I gained was a prison that no one could see. That was just the first step. The worst part was yet to come, when hurting would cease to evoke any emotion. After the first death, something inside me went silent. It's hard to explain in words, but it felt like a door within my soul had been locked from the inside. At first, I still remembered the victims' faces. I could still visualize their wide eyes, pleading for help, as if each expression haunted me. However, as time passed, the images began to lose clarity, until they dissolved completely within my pride. Instead of seeing human beings with stories, I began to see obstacles that needed to be removed so that I could maintain my empire. No matter who it was, if they threatened me, I erased them. I told myself it was necessary, that it was part of the life I chose, that the world was cruel, and that I was just playing by the rules imposed on me. I repeated this so many times that it became truth within me. Crime not only destroys your morals, it reconfigures your perception. What once seemed serious becomes routine. What once seemed like a limit becomes an opportunity. What once provoked fear begins to provoke pride. And when you normalize evil, it becomes the air you breathe. I no longer felt anything. Not fear. Not guilt. Nothing. Coldness settled within me like a silent virus. What shocked others was, for me, just another day at work. The night I ordered the execution of a young man who owed money, I didn't think about alternatives. I didn't think about forgiveness. I only thought about sending a message. If you challenge me, you die. I had transformed my need to be respected into a machine, programmed to eliminate anything that threatened my power. And every time I gave such an order, I felt I was consolidating my dominance. In reality, I was only consolidating my condemnation. Over time, I began to emotionally distance myself even from the people around me. I wouldn't allow anyone to get close enough to have any kind of access to what I was feeling. In fact, I was afraid to feel. To feel meant acknowledging that I was wrong. It meant admitting that my life wasn't about strength but about despair. so I hid behind increasingly cruel decisions, believing that the more violent I was, the more invincible I would seem. Indifference is the final stage of spiritual death. I was alive on the outside, but dead on the inside. When I looked in the mirror, I no longer recognized the man forming before me. I wasn't the young man who once dreamed of something simple, like a normal life. I was a stranger with empty eyes, accustomed to giving orders and being obeyed. I had become the kind of person I myself would one day fear. And it was precisely when I thought nothing could bring me down that everything began to crumble. I thought I controlled my destiny, but destiny was silently leading me to my end. Behind the facade of authority, there was a spiritual warning that I ignored. Sometimes in the silence of the early morning, I felt a presence, not of peace, but of alert, as if God were saying once again that this life had an expiration date. But I never listened. I never wanted to listen. I only realized that everything was about to fall apart when the noise I feared most finally echoed. The sound was dry, quick, unexpected. It wasn't a warning, it was a gunshot. And in that instant, the predator finally became prey. That night everything seemed the same as any other. The kind of routine that for any normal person would be a threat, but for me had become just another predictable chapter in my empire. I was in an abandoned parking lot, the kind of place the city pretends not to see and where the dirtiest deals happen. The sky was overcast, as if even the stars refused to witness what was about to happen. 2 cars parked silently, headlights off. I knew it didn't smell good, but ego speaks louder when you believe you're untouchable. I got out of the car slowly, as if the world lay beneath my feet. The ground was damp, reflecting off the few remaining working streetlights, creating patches of yellow light on the cracked asphalt. As I walked, I felt that old sense of superiority, as if nothing there could escape my control. When you live in fear of others, you forget that fear can also catch up with you. It was then, in the middle of the conversation, that the silence became a warning. A small detail, but deadly. No one looked me in the eye. They weren't there to negotiate. They were there to eliminate me. Before I could react, a sound cut through the air. Dry, quick, definitive. I felt something warm pierce my chest. There was no time to think, to run, to negotiate with fate. Just a profound shock, as if the world had pulled the rug out from under me. I tried to put my hand on the wound, but my body wouldn't obey. Blood trickled down my fingers, and suddenly, I realized that every drop I lost carried away the power I once thought I possessed. My legs weakened, and everything around me began to fade, as if I were diving into an aquarium of silence. The voices became slow, almost unrecognizable. It was no longer a gang fight, no longer a turf war. It was the end. I fell to my knees and, when my face touched the cold ground, I felt no pain. I felt emptiness. There was no one to save me, no one to hold my hand, no one to cry out my name in despair. I died exactly as I lived, surrounded by people, but completely alone. As my vision faded, a thought occurred to me that had never crossed my mind before. I always thought that when I died, I would simply fade away. No consciousness, no consequences. But there, between my last breath and the absolute silence, I realized something terrifying. Death is not the end. It is the beginning of something all too real. I expected darkness, but when everything went black, I stayed awake. I was no longer in my body, and the worst was yet to come. When everything went dark, I imagined that would be the end, because all my life I believed that death was simply the final point of a story that no one else reads. However, at the moment my last breath was taken, something completely unexpected happened. I felt as if an invisible force pulled me back from within my chest, traversing my own existence. It was as if I had been ripped from my flesh with a precision that defied any human explanation. Suddenly, absolute silence gave way to an awareness so intense that it seemed I had never truly been awake while alive. I found myself standing, a few meters from my body lying on the ground. I could see every detail, the pool of blood expanding around my chest, the metallic glint of the weapon lying beside me, the desperate look in the eyes of one of the men who, even though responsible for the ambush, hadn't expected to witness such a scene. Time, which had previously rushed by, like a storm, now seemed to move slowly, almost as if it had lost its urgency. I tried to understand what was happening, tried to feel my heart, tried to breathe, but there was no heartbeat, no air, and yet I was conscious. My first reaction was to try and call for help. I opened my mouth to scream, but no words came out. The feeling was suffocating, as if I were trapped between two worlds. I walked towards people, touched their shoulders, tried to grab anything that would prove I was there, but my hands passed through everything as if I were made of wind and memory. Despair overwhelmed me because at that moment, I understood the cruel and inevitable truth. I was dead, yet I continued to exist. Death had not erased my identity, it had only separated me from matter. As I observed my body, I realized that all the arrogance I had carried throughout my life had vanished. For the first time, I felt small, vulnerable, and completely unable to control what was happening. I felt an overwhelming weight of reality when I saw my body being turned over by one of the men to confirm that I was no longer breathing. I wanted to repent. I wanted to ask for forgiveness, but it was too late for any words. Nothing could be done there. That body lying on the ground was no longer me, and yet it was all I had to prove that I had existed. Then, something changed. A force I couldn't see, but felt, began to pull me back, as if the atmosphere were a great river and I were being swept away by an invisible current. The sensation was both terrifying and inescapable. I had no control over the direction. I was simply being carried along. The environment began to transform, the light began to dim, the sound began to fade, and an absolute certainty took hold of me. I was being led to a trial. I thought I would find darkness, punishment, or emptiness, but what appeared before me was something I could never have imagined. Someone was there, and he was waiting for me, as I was dragged. Along by that force that didn't come from any physical place, I felt myself crossing a boundary between what I knew as reality and something completely different. There was no ground, no time, no direction, yet there was an awareness so intense that it seemed to touch every part of my soul, forcing me to see what I had spent my whole life avoiding. The darkness wasn't an environment. It was the result of everything I had become. I felt the weight of my choices like chains I had placed upon myself, and no matter how hard I tried to resist, something pushed me into an inevitable confrontation with the truth. Then, without warning, the light appeared, not as an ordinary glow, but as an absolute presence. It didn't just illuminate the surrounding space. It permeated every layer of my existence. It didn't come from above or below. It seemed to emerge from the very fabric of reality, and when it enveloped me, I felt something I had never felt before. It wasn't fear, although it was impossible not to tremble. It wasn't guilt, because at that moment guilt was insignificant compared to what I understood. It was the certainty that I was standing before someone who knew me profoundly, without me uttering a word. The light began to take shape, and before my eyes could comprehend it, my soul recognized it. I didn't ask who it was. I knew. The spirit bowed without the mind's permission. It was Jesus. He didn't accuse me. He didn't list my sins. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at me. And that look pierced through all the masks I'd spent years creating. His presence didn't show power. It was power itself. And while I tried to maintain the arrogance that defined my life, the scenes began to unfold around me. Not as memories, but as living truths revealing who I had become. I tried to justify myself, but before him, there were no excuses, and Jesus spoke only one sentence, with an authority that dismantled everything within me. You always knew what was right. And in that instant, I understood. The judgment wasn't about what I did. It was about who I chose to be. When Jesus extended his hand, I realized that gesture contained no threat or accusation, but pure revelation. The light around him moved like something alive, reacting to his presence so consciously that it seemed to perceive every thought that arose within me, as if that luminosity had been created to reveal and not merely illuminate. Gradually, this light began to recede, not as one who abandons, but as one who exposes a reality that had always been there, but which I had never had the courage to see. The brightness diminished until a space opened before me, and what emerged was not simple darkness, because there was no coldness, no depth. There was only absence, an absence so dense that it seemed to have weight. It was an absence of peace, an absence of love, an absence of God. Jesus didn't push me or order me to look. He simply allowed me to see what had always existed and what my choices had insisted on ignoring. When my spiritual eyes adjusted to that absence, I realized I wasn't facing fire or physical torment, but something infinitely more devastating. An absolute void where souls existed, conscious of themselves, yet incapable of feeling anything beyond the despair of knowing they had chosen to live without God throughout their existence. These souls didn't scream because there was no voice. They didn't touch each other because there was no contact. They simply existed within their own consciousness, trapped in the eternal echo of the choices they had made. As I watched, I felt something even more devastating. Faces emerged, not as fleeting memories, but as entire lives cut short by my violence and selfishness. I saw mothers embracing coffins that should never have existed. I saw young people who never had the opportunity to live what God dreamed for them. I saw dreams destroyed before they were born. Jesus looked at me with a sadness I had never seen before, and in a firm voice said, "You didn't just take lives, you interrupted destinies." At that moment, I understood that God doesn't push anyone towards torment. Torment is the inevitable fate of those who choose to walk away from the light. And there, faced with the truth, there is no argument. Only what you have become remains. The moment that vision ended, I felt my insides crumble. Everything I had built as an identity, all the strength, all the arrogance, all turned to dust. In the presence of Jesus, it was as if every layer I had created to protect myself was being ripped away without me being able to stop it. I wanted to run away from myself. I wanted to go back in time. I wanted to tear the weight of the lives I had destroyed from my shoulders, but there was no escape from the truth. When I finally understood that I was separated from him, not because of a lack of love, but because of my deliberate choices, something inside me broke. I didn't ask for a second chance because I thought I deserved it. I asked because I finally understood the value of the life I had despised. It was then that Jesus did something I never thought could happen. He placed his hand on my shoulder, and in that touch there was no condemnation, only mercy. I felt a love so profound, so pure, and so utterly different from anything I had ever experienced, that my spirit reacted before any reasoning. I wept in a way I had never wept before, not only for what I had done, but for what I had lost of being. In an instant, the light that had previously exposed my sins now shone through my wounds, as if to say that there was still something in me worthy of being restored. Without understanding how, I was thrown back into my body. I opened my eyes in a hospital bed, surrounded by machines trying to keep my heart beating. I was weak, intubated, immobile, and yet I knew I was alive for one reason only. God gave me a second chance. When I was released, my first action wasn't to go back to the streets. It was to seek out the families I had destroyed. I asked for forgiveness. I confessed. I cried as I rebuilt, piece by piece, what I had helped to break. Today I live to warn people who still believe they can control their own destiny. I am proof that God can transform even the hardest heart, provided there is true repentance. If you believe that God still gives second chances, write in the comments, "Lord, change my story before it's too late." When I look back and reflect on everything I've lived through, I realize that the greatest tragedy of my story wasn't the violence I committed, nor the death I faced, nor the hell I witnessed, but rather the fact that I spent so many years believing I had time. The most dangerous lie the enemy whispers to the human heart isn't that God doesn't exist, but that you can decide to seek Him tomorrow. I lived for decades believing I could change when I was ready, as if repentance were a choice I controlled and not a window that can close without warning. I thought I would have other opportunities, other days, other chances, and when I realized there would be no more time for anything, it was too late. The only reason I returned was God's mercy, and there is no guarantee that a second chance will be given again. No matter who you are, where you live, what you've done, or how much you believe you're in control, there comes a moment when life and death are so close that no human force can prevent the encounter with truth. When you stand before God, no argument will justify your choices, no pride will sustain the mask, and no excuse will survive before the one who knows even the thoughts you never uttered. If there's one thing I learned in that place between this world and eternity, it's that no one deceives God. We can deceive friends, family, neighbors, even ourselves, but before Him, everything is exposed. If today you feel a weight on your heart, if any part of my story is touching your soul, don't ignore it. This isn't emotion, this is a warning. Life is too fragile to be wasted trying to prove something to the world while heaven watches in silence. Don't wait until you've lost everything to finally recognize that God has always been calling you. He doesn't want your religion, He wants your heart. If you are hearing this now, while there is still time, surrender your life to Christ before eternity presents itself without return. If this message resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and stay with us. Here, each video is a call, each story is a warning, and each testimony is an invitation for you to walk closer to God. The journey doesn't end here.